In this video, I want to give you a simple trick you can use when you start to write your novel to help to find out if there's a better version of your story hidden inside the one you intend to write, a better way to tell your story. It's all to do with point of view, and to help illustrate the theme, I'm taking the X40 bus to this place, just outside Oxford, Wallingford, and I'm going in search of a lady sitting under a tree. So welcome to another instalment in my series on how to write your novel using that most unlikely of writing implements, a round Oxford bus ticket. Point of view is who tells a story. It can get quite complicated, but stripped down to the essentials, it comes down to a choice of a first-person narrator or a traditional omniscient third person. There are all sorts of other permutations, but these are your bread and butter. Charles Dickens' David Copperfield begins with a first-person narrator. Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show. Dombey and Son, by contrast, begins in the third person. Dombey sat in the corner of the darkened room in the great armchair by the bedside. With the first person, we inhabit the skin of the character, we become them. The third person is a disembodied voice that has a godlike overview and has access to the thoughts and feelings of multiple characters. And the crucial difference is, we generally believe and trust the third person narrator to tell the truth. But with the first, the character is our only source of information, so we can never be sure if the character is telling the truth. This is a lady sitting under a tree. It's a statue of Agatha Christie, who lived in this town for many years. And one of her most celebrated early novels is this, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. In 1926, when it was published, it shocked the literary world by a revelation at the end. A spoiler alert, if you don't want to know the ending, skip ahead now. The novel is a murder mystery narrated by a certain Dr. James Shepherd, and he reveals at the end that he was the murderer. He was, in fact, what has come to be known as an unreliable narrator, and it's a pretty common motif in modern fiction. Dr. Shepherd was far from being the first unreliable narrator. In Lawrence Sterne's The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, published in 1759, the narrator begins an account of his life with a description of his own conception. He claims that everything that subsequently went wrong with his life can be traced back to the moment 9 months before he entered the world, when his father and mother were making love, and his mother asked at the most inopportune moment whether his father had remembered to wind the clock. Well, of course, we know straight away he is pulling our leg. Similarly, Gunter Grass's novel The Tin Drum begins with the words, "Granted, I am an inmate of a mental hospital. My keeper is watching me. He never lets me out of his sight." Well, this signals straight away that the character might well be delusional. And a large part of our reading pleasure derives from us not being sure, having to figure it out, having to figure out how much we can believe. The great Japanese movie director Akira Kurosawa explored this notion of trust in his movie Rashomon, which recounts the tale of a murdered samurai. The story of his murder is told by multiple characters, a bandit, a woodcutter, a priest, and even the ghost of the dead samurai delivered via a medium. And all the accounts are contradictory. It's a great movie, but I want to consider that other great Kurosawa movie, Jack and the Beanstalk. Okay, I admit, Akira Kurosawa never made a movie of Jack and the Beanstalk, but I want to imagine that he did, so we can see the storytelling riches available to us if we take a deeper dive into point of view. The movie will be called Jakku to Mama no Ki. And if there are any Japanese people watching this, I'm sorry, okay? The version in the fairy tales is told by a traditional third-person narrator. Jack took the cow to market, and on the way a trickster conned him into exchanging it for some beans. His horrified mother threw them out of the window, and overnight they grew into the beanstalk. Jack climbs up, stole the giant's goose that lays the golden eggs, and as the giant pursued him, he chopped down the beanstalk, killing the giant. And Jack is presented as a hero, although it doesn't really seem much of one to me. But let's look at some more interesting ways to tell a story. Taking our cue from Kurosawa, let's imagine Jack is on trial for the giant's murder. The court is convened by the priest. Jack takes a stand and says the giant was a ruthless killer. What do you think? Is he telling the truth? Then they hear from the giant's wife. She sobs as she tells the court that her husband was the most kind and gentle man who ever lived, a man who would weep on a winter's morning to find a butterfly frozen by the frost. Then we hear from a spiritualist who reports the words of the giant's ghost. And next we hear from the giant's housekeeper, who tells the court that Jack and the giant's wife were having an affair, and their plan was to kill the giant and steal the goose. Well, the jury is outraged and Jack is sentenced to death. Now, using this angle, I want to consider a number of different ways we might tell the story, using different flavours of the unreliable narrator. And the reason is this. It may be that the point of view for your story is baked into the premise, and there isn't only one way to tell it. But that might not be the case. It might be the case that there are a number of ways, and if you spend a few days or a few hours writing the opening in different points of view, you might discover a much better way to write your story. Let's imagine the story begins with Jack in prison awaiting execution, and we consider some different types of unreliable narrator. He could be psychiatrically disturbed, like Chief Bromden in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The head of the lunatic asylum, Dr. Betelheim, came to see me this morning. He said, "I hear you tried to start a riot in the canteen because they gave you beans." Or it could be a picaresque novel from the Spanish Picaro for Rogue. That banging sound that keeps me awake at night is the sound of them building my gallows, all for a bit of gardening, cutting down a beanstalk. How was I to know there was a man climbing down it? Or he could be the innocent abroad like Huckleberry Finn, whose words reveal more than he understands. Imagine Jack is still just a child. The guard says the wooden thing they are building in the yard is for me to swing from. I like swings. Or he could be an outsider like Alex from A Clockwork Orange. There was me, that is Jack, and my 3 droogs, that is Pete, Georgie and Jim, and we sat in the Corova milk bar thinking about how we were going to steal a goose. But of course, if we want to know the truth, we would choose a third-person narrator. And he could also tell us about a fascinating twist in the tale, one that Jack would never have suspected. And I'll tell you about it after this short commercial break.
Scientists tell us the universe is very big, and you are very small, and soon you will be gone, and it will be as if you had never existed. You need to do something about this. Carve your initials into the tree of life. Grab Gateway to Narnia, my free 10-part email course on how to write a novel, and cry out to the cold, indifferent stars, I was here, I lived, I loved, I mattered. Gateway to Narnia, the link is in the description below.
Okay, an interesting denouement that only the third-person narrator could deliver. After they hanged Jack, the priest goes to see the spiritualist, because he's figured out that the spiritualist was really a ventriloquist who fabricated the voice of the giant. It was he who stole the goose. But when the priest arrives, he finds a baby, and the spiritualist is dead with a knife in his chest. Who killed him? The giant's wife. She throws herself on the mercy of the priest and explains why she did it. And if you want to live happily ever after, don't forget to grab Gateway to Narnia. And you may also like to check out my new novel, A Streetcar Named Aberystwyth. Links are in the description below.